Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Certified Forgotten. We are your podcast that talks about films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. That would be specifically horror films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. And we fucking love them. There's just no other way to put it. We think it's great that we can shine a light on some of these movies that most people haven't seen, that most people haven't gone looking for. I have started a letterbox list that has me trolling into the very deep depths of hell itself. And that means that we get to unearth the gems with our wonderful guests and bring them to you. I'm one half of your Matt host. I'm Matt Monagle. I'm joined, as always, by my friend, by my colleague, by my sleepy boy on Pacific time, Matt Donato. How you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm tired.
I know.
It is. I could deal with it. It is something of a. I am not a morning person usually. I will admit that. I am a work until 2 or 3 in the morning person, and then, when work starts at 9, I'm online, but still not awake yet. Let's say so. I'm very much a ease into the morning kind of person. So to be this bright and shiny and personable is not usually what I do.
Well, I have started drinking coffee in the mornings as a way to wean myself off Diet Coke, replacing one addiction with another, which is good. My brain is still mostly there. So I am perky, and I will be perky enough for the both of us.
I am not a coffee drinker. People are amazed because they see me running around festivals, not sleeping at all and getting a ton of work done. But like, I don't drink coffee or any kind of like caffeine, really, Monster Energy, all that shit. Like, I am just this chaos is just ingrained in me.
That is, was there ever a monster phase for you? You do strike me as maybe
No,
a monster
straight
phase.
up. No. Oh, no. I was never an energy drink person. Like
Caffeine straight
college,
edge. That's who you
no.
are.
Yeah, like literally, yeah, straight edge. Of course, that's me. Everyone knows me.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Would never put that poison in his body.
I just wanted to point out too, like you made a good point before about Letterboxd and having a list for movies that you're putting out there. I should say that if anyone listens to the podcast and wants to have a list of the movies that we've covered, I started a Letterboxd a while ago, and a list that has every single episode. I've taken the movie and put it into a single list. So if you are listening to this and a certified forgotten fan and are curious enough, go to my Letterboxd, go to my lists, and find the certified forgotten ranking, and you'll have every single movie that we have covered, which is over. I think we're at about 110 movies just for guest movies. I don't do the main, like, if we review him, I don't throw it on there. I just do our guest stuff. But yeah, if you're curious, it exists.
Do we stand by all of those movies? Absolutely not. We do not. Our guests bring us stuff sometimes that one or both of us actually don't like, but I promise you'll have a really good time, and you will definitely have some conversation starters for your friends if you're moving that far off the beaten path. On that note, Donato, this is an hour-long episode. We do have an awesome guest this week, so I believe introductions are in order.
Yes, we're back in the swing of finally getting guests on intermittently instead of going to a month and a half of just me and my other Matt over here. So without much more time wasted here, let's bring in our guest for today, who is going to blaze the trail a little bit. We've had authors on, we've had filmmakers, we've had journalists, and now we're going to switch it up a little bit and have somebody else from a different medium altogether. And that is Mr. Colin Le Sueur, best-selling indie tabletop RPG designer. Colin, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. What an introduction.
Now, Colin, you did us a solid when we were making sure we knew how to pronounce your name. The way you introduce yourself is Colin Le Sueur, swears and fuck, which I think is my favorite introduction I've ever heard, and immediately puts you in rarefied air among our podcast guests. How long have you been using that?
I think just for the last couple of years. My name, it took me a good 10 years to learn how to spell my name. And you ask 10 different people how to pronounce it. Half of them will just look panicked and kind of do anything but say what they think it is. The others will give it a good attempt, and you'll get 3 or 4 different versions or different pronunciations of it. So it's something that kind of I've accepted and internalized now, and so I've decided to have a bit of fun.
I respect that, because I am I don't think of my name as my last name as particular complicated, less complicated since the Harry Potter movies got popular, because people know Professor McGonagall, it fits. But when I write in cursive, when I'm signing my last name, I invariably leave out a letter or a vowel. I will look back on it and be like, I completely forgot the G or the A in my last name. So I appreciate somebody else whose last name has been, even if it isn't now, a little bit of a mystery to you, because that is me and Monagle.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about horror, because that is the reason for the season and the nature of the podcast. We're going to talk about your background as a game designer and how horror, I think, as somebody who has played one of your games and read through the newest one that you're about to release. I think horror is a very strong inspiration and component for that. But going way back to the beginning, are there a couple of original horror films, horror stories, or horror games that you remember that kind of introduced you to the genre and sparked your love of the genre?
Yeah, I think I've got a few of those kind of classic 80s films and music videos that anyone who grew up in the 80s will have been traumatized by. So stuff like Michael Jackson's Thriller, the video for Thriller, that scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Large Marge, that's a traumatic moment. It's seared into my brain. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Judge Doom, and like how he kind of his end form essentially. That again scared me. So I always had a like an interest in horror, piqued by those like traumatic moments. But I think it was mainly zombie films. So it was Return of the Living Dead, which I saw a clip of when I was staying at a hotel. I went down to the lobby to get like a pop or something, and they just had it playing on a TV in the reception. And it's the scene where there's the torso of the zombie woman tied down to the table, and she's screaming about brains. And again, that just seared into my 8-year-old brain. And then Night of the Living Dead, I saw that on A&E. They had like they used to show it every once in a while, and I loved that. I fell in love with Night of the Living Dead, and it's still one of my favorite movies. So definitely, and like kind of imprinted the zombie into my brain.
I love Return of the Living Dead. I think it's probably my favorite horror movie of all time, or it's
Nice.
up there in the top 3 no
Yeah.
matter what. And that scene is always in my mind too, because it adds this like existential oomph to the idea of being a zombie. Because like,
Yeah.
okay, sure, if you're a Night of the Living Dead zombie, before we get to land and we start having zombies that are personable, I don't know, the idea of a zombie is just like, cool, you're dead, but you don't really know you're shambling, all that stuff. And then Return comes out, and it's like, nah, like the brain still works. You're still thinking, what you're craving, all that stuff. So I love that scene in a largely funny movie that is actually one of the most like harrowing kind of like purgatorial sentences you can get in like
Yeah.
the horror world. Like let a werewolf rip me apart, let me be dead, but no, like don't let me just be a zombie forever, craving brains and knowing it.
Yeah. It hurts to be dead.
You have no clue how much ground you just gained with Donato by name dropping that film in particular. That comes up about as I would say that's Demon Wind and Return of the Living Dead are neck and neck in terms of references on this podcast.
Nice.
Simple man.
I'm happy to say I managed to see it in the cinema in the theater like in the last month. So the local cinema here were playing like kind of classics for Halloween. So I managed to see it on the big screen, which was amazing.
I do wonder because I saw that they were doing what were they doing? They were doing locally, I think, Evil Dead with a live score, which very
Nice.
cool idea. Like I love the live score things, but I do wonder if eventually that live score concept will get so popular that we'll be seeing movies like Return of the Living Dead with like a live band playing and a live orchestra playing. I think that would be really cool. I wish there was more. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I love the role that music plays in movies, and I wish
Yeah.
every movie would have a good soundtrack, and not all of them do. But that's a conversation for a little bit later, maybe. I think.
I mean, I know you hate LA, but I just saw Nightmare Before Christmas with a live orchestra and Danny Elfman and the entire cast that is still living. And for those, unfortunately,
Wow.
who couldn't be there, Keith David did Oogie Boogie, and absolutely like we all know Keith David as the actor. We all know Keith David can rock it, but like I think a lot of people forget he also is a tremendous singer. So he went out
Yeah.
there and just obliterated the Oogie Boogie song, like in the best way. He was so good. And then Janelle Monáe did Sally's parts, and we had Janelle Monáe come out in full makeup like Sally, to the point where her eyes were closed and she just had like kind of like the buttons on them, and she's like
Amazing.
arms out, shuffling around, completely blind in character. It just so I mean to say Monocle, yes, it will get that
Yeah.
big because we are doing that out here. And I know you hate LA, but I was at the Hollywood Bowl watching Nightmare Before Christmas with live orchestra.
Happy for you, bud. Well, let me, Colin. Let's talk a little bit about how you came to be a game designer too, because I know, I've known you online for a few years now. You have been very supportive of my writing and kind of the work that we do at Certified Forgotten, which does not go unappreciated. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no
But,
problem.
in following you and, as you've been developing the last couple of games and as you have been radically transparent about your experience about being an indie tabletop designer, I'm curious if this was the end game or the goal for you, or if there were other forms of writing that you looked at. Because your website does have, from a few years ago, a bunch of film reviews that you've published. There are other types of writing that you've done. So how did you narrow in on the type of writing that you decided to do as a career?
So I started writing when I was a kid, just short stories everywhere, like same kind of like writing and drawing. I think a lot of kids go through a drawing phase, and kind of some of them grow out of it and some of them don't. And I didn't grow out of mine until I went into university, because I wanted to, like, I was massively into comic books when I was a teenager. So I wanted to go to university to learn how to write comics, and
Mm.
I wanted to do a major in English and a minor in art, so I could, because that was the closest thing that I could get to kind of making comics
And
back
incredibly
then.
practical degrees to have as well, as we all
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, back then you couldn't really, like, there weren't like college, or there weren't college classes on comic creation, stuff like that. But then I realized that I drifted away from art a bit more, and I wanted to focus on writing. And then I saw there was a film studies program, and I thought the film was close to comics as well. So I decided to try that out, and I fell in love with film studies. So that became my major, with the minor in sociology. And then that kind of went from there. So I did my BA in Canada, and then I went to England for my master's in film, and that's kind of what brought me over here. So yeah, like, I started off as primarily short stories, then moved more into comics, and then essays and stuff like that. Now I'm back picking something back up that I used to play when I was a kid, role playing games. So that's, yeah, essentially come full circle.
How, when you think about approaching something, in the other types of writing that you do, how much of that do you think is informed by your background as a film student? Because I have a bias, and that's what you see talked about online a lot, which is that the people that study the arts become these incredibly well-rounded. Like, you need those people. It's not just business degrees and things of that nature that you need in your organizations. That people that study
Mhm.
the arts develop critical thinking, develop communication skills, et cetera. So I'm always curious about folks that do study or delve into creative fields and then maybe go into, you run a small business effectively. How has that background helped you prepare both creatively with the work that you're doing, but also thinking about how you're connecting, the stories that you're telling, promoting the stories that you're telling, and the games that you're developing to other audiences, and finding those intersection points where, because the stuff that you do is heavily marketed within the context of their filmic influences, which I really, really love.
Yeah, so it's my life's kind of taken two parallel paths. On the one hand, there's like writing and kind of the creative side. On the other hand is like what I do for my day job, or what I have done for my day job, which is IT. Because I had an affinity for computers when I was a kid, and that's kind of carried me through life. So you've got the IT track, which is kind of what pays the bills,
Mhm.
and eventually that went to like business continuity. That's my focus now, or that's what I do for my day job now. And then kind of the other parallel path, which I managed to pick back up again, is like the creative side. And that crossover, like that kind of one foot in the corporate world, has helped with that kind of that technical marketing side, the promotional side, that sort of thing. And then the other foot in the creative world is what's kind of generative and keeping me creating things.
I think we talk about that a lot here because Monagle and I are in the same boat with our endeavors as well. It's we've all got the business day job. Like, again, my degree is in business management, and so for me, it's very much I went corporate first and found it was unfulfilling, and found the second side of it because I just needed some kind of creative outlet, and stumbled upon this. But there was such a I think like an underrepresented amount of appreciation for having both, because it's what you just said is perfect, like literally like having
Mhm.
one foot in one door and one foot in the other. I feel like in my world the same thing has happened where my creative side and my corporate and like more analytical and business oriented side have helped me tremendously in both careers, because like I wouldn't know how to navigate the freelance side of things without having my business side, but on the same side, you know, like it goes both ways. So I think I don't know. I think that's kind of like the happy medium where we can romanticize the idea of, oh, like being fully creative, being fully this, like, you know, down with fucking on the other side and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think the balance is kind of where it's at, because I understand the business side of things, the corporate aspect of it, and I don't get lost in the romantic elements sometimes, because God, if I did, I'd fucking hate myself at times.
Yeah, and I do is to speak to the corporate thing. I think there is something to be said for being part of something that is not something you own, right? Too. Like I know that's a mentality that's a switch for a lot of folks where they're like, "Oh, I want to be my own boss. I want to run my." It sucks to be your own boss. It really like it is a challenging proposition to be the beginning, the middle, and the end of your own success stories. And so I did not know that you worked in IT, but I respect the connection there, because I do think that there's something about being able to work on your projects on your own terms, but like know that you don't need to move units to survive, right? I feel like if I, and I know a lot of our peers right now are kind of going through this, but if I was 100% relying on my film criticism income in order to make a living, that would be tough. So I wonder too if it's that balance that allows you to kind of pursue the types of projects and write about the kind of things you want. Because I imagine if you were if the goal was just like move as many books as possible, have as successful an itch.io campaign as you could, you probably wouldn't be telling the kind of stories that you're telling in your games.
Yeah, I think if I wanted to kind of make as much money as possible in tabletop, I'd be writing 5e stuff,
Yeah.
or like I'd be kind of chasing the chasing the official IPs of like adaptations instead of doing it kind of covertly in making my own inspired by games, instead of like working on the actual brand names. Which I have had a bit of experience with that. Like one of my recent, or in the last couple of years, freelance work was on the Dark Souls role playing game, like the
Oh,
official
nice.
Dark Souls one. And that partly came about because of like the game that I made that was inspired by Dark Souls. So, and I had a taste of that, but obviously that was writing for a D&D 5th edition adaptation, or D&D 5th edition related game. So it wasn't the work that I wanted to do. It wasn't the story that I wanted to tell. And having the freedom to do kind of a combat free adaptation essentially of Millennium is because that's one of my favorite shows, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what's been rattling around in my head for years. Like that I'm able to do that just because, you know, because I'm
Because
not
you can.
reliant on, yeah, I'm not reliant
Well,
on a 5e
I want to
audience.
talk about Midnight of the Century in a second, but I want to before we do that, I want to talk just
Hmm.
quickly about We Deal in Lead, because We Deal in
Hmm.
Lead is the Dark Tower inspired game that put you first on my radar, that I put on my table, that I played with my friends. They killed NPCs they weren't supposed to kill. They beat the shit out of my big bad. It was just like a wonderful time at the table, and it was that
Nice.
kind of rules like game that I find myself having a lot of fun playing, where I can develop a small little scenario, have a couple of friends play with me, and then, that's it. I don't need to plan 15 different sessions or book our Sundays up through the next, 2 years in order to get a campaign done. But I know that part of the appeal of We Deal in Lead for a lot of fans like us is because it is deeply inspired by Stephen King's Dark Tower series. So can you talk a little bit about where you found yourself wanting to poke and prod at the universe that King had created, and how it turned into its own thing over time?
Yeah, so a similar kind of thing where like I always wanted to play a Dark Tower role playing game because the world is so interesting, and like the mythology that gets set up in the book series. There's like a lot there to chew on and to kind of get your hands on. And so I wanted to, even just the idea of chivalric gunslingers, like gunslingers who are essentially knights,
Yeah.
patrolling or kind of wandering a dead world or a dying world. Just really cool idea. Like as a teenager, it just I was like, oh wow, this was like made for me. So I wanted to replicate that, or to play a Dark Tower game that didn't exist. So I decided to make it myself. because there's a lot of Stephen King. He's a great storyteller. He's a great world builder, but there's also a lot of stuff that hasn't aged well and a lot of like problematic stuff, especially in the Dark Tower.
Stephen
And
King stuff not
it's
aging well? This is the first I'm hearing of this.
absolutely. So finding my own way to kind of navigate around that without discounting other people's experiences, but just to kind of make my version of that, just and have an interesting world for people to explore and for people to play in.
And how much, I mean, I know that the rules are kind of parallel or similar to the Dark Tower series, but I remember in reading the rule book there was a lot of latitude for you to bring horror elements too, with the idea of the various worlds that you could visit. How much time do you spend thinking about the horror elements of these stories? And we'll talk about Midnight of the Century in a second too, because I think that one seems like it's a real springboard for horror
Yeah.
forward stories. How much of that finds its way onto the page for you, of the things that you enjoy, the ideas from other horror authors and from horror movies that you love? Are you conscious of putting that stuff in there, or does it just flow from the story that you're developing?
I always have horror in the back of my mind, where if it's something like a dark wood or like a shadowy forest, that sort of thing, like the horror archetypes are all kind of always sitting in there. I don't I don't specifically set out to write a like a horror game, but the elements that I include are naturally like horrific. Um, and the systems that I've started using are are a bit more like they're kind of horror themselves. Like you play most of the time insignificant people in a dark world that's out to kill you at every step. So if you like take the wrong path down a side street, you'll get um, smushed by like a horrific skeleton monster. Um, so just innate in the gameplay is that horror element. Is that because it's not like kind of to contrast it from something like Dungeons and Dragons where you're playing heroic adventurers. In a lot of the games that I play and that I've been inspired by, you're just kind of looking to survive and looking to like make your way in the world without getting horribly killed.
And permanent death is a big thing. At least we deal in lead, right? Like these are not characters that will sit there and take a 150 hit points worth of damage. Like the worlds that you create, you die quickly, and you die bad more often than not.
Exactly, like because notoriously there's a lot of death like there's a lot of character death in the Dark Tower. Some of the most traumatic character deaths I've experienced reading a novel series happened in the Dark Tower. So that's kind of just the cycle of it, and like that's in the world of the Dark Tower, that's like the wheel. Essentially, the wheel keeps turning, people
Mhm.
keep dying, but then potentially reborn at the end, or the world kind of remakes itself. So yeah, like in the games that you play, death has meaning. Like if you're in a gunslinger party and one of the gunslingers dies, then that affects the party. That your strength is broken as a party. It kind of impacts everything you do. So yeah, death is consequential, but it's also meant to be impactful and memorable.
And with your new game, Midnight of the Century, just finished crowdfunding. You described it as heavily influenced by Millennium. The material that you put out also talks about it in terms of films like Seven, but it is an End of Days, I think, is another one that you name drop, which I love. It's pre-apocalyptic, correct? In that it is not at the end of the world, or I should say, it's not after the end of the world. It is in the run-up to the end of the world, which is, I think, a very unique position for storytellers to take. I think that at the after and the way before, you see a lot of
Mhm.
stories on, but like that transition period
Yeah.
between the beginning of the end and the end is a place that not a lot of stories occupy. So what is it about that liminal state where the world has not ended but is right on the edge of that made you want to delve in and take a lot of stories?
I think that the main and primary influence is always going to be Millennium itself. The 'Cause that's set like the first episode was in '96, I think, and that's kind of in the lead up to the Millennium as kind of as the general populace understood it, which is the 31st of December 1999 switches over to the 1st of January. technically it's not actually the millennium at that point, but doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It's yeah, it's public, public perception. And so it's about kind of looking to either stop or control the end of the world. And I think it's always interesting, like thinking of films like Last Night, Don McKellar's Last Night, which is an amazing Canadian drama, which is set kind of in the run up to the end of the world. Like it's the last night on Earth. There's this unexplained astrological event that's happening that means the world's going to be destroyed at a specific time. So it's following these characters in what they do on their last night on Earth. So some of them go and have like uh, Christmas dinner, even though it's in June or July. One guy just goes out to have sex with as many women as he can, or as many people as he can, that sort of thing. And it's all about how that affects, what do you do when you know that the world is going to end. So I think like having that as kind of not a direct inspiration, but just in the back of my mind, like it makes it really interesting. And knowing that there are forces at work that you have no control over whatsoever. And it's not a question of if the world's going to end, it's a question of when and how the world's going to end. So, and how do you navigate that? How do you navigate a world that you know is going to end?
And I love that one of the things that you emphasized in Midnight of the Century is the lack of combat. Because I think, as sort of an early transition to the film we're talking about, I think people go into horror movies with expectations of jump scares and things of that nature
Mhm.
that are supposed to happen, and like stalk and kill scenes. And like that is horror to a lot of people that don't spend a lot of time with the genre. So a movie like Black Mountain Side catches them a little bit by surprise because it's a much slower build. There aren't a lot of these horrific moments. They happen later in the film. I imagine you might encounter some of that in the tabletop community, or folks that are not as enmeshed that think, "Oh, this is sounds like an interesting game." That reaction of like, "Wait, I don't get to shoot people with a gun, right? Like I don't get
Yeah.
to, have my Max Payne moment at the end of the world." What is
Yeah.
it about that, about the appeal of no combat, that made that an essential part of your gameplay?
I think part of it's a reaction to my previous games where combat was a major focus. Like Runecairn is Norse fantasy and inspired by Dark Souls, so it's all about combat and gunslingers. Obviously, being gunslingers in We Deal in Lead, like combat is a big thing, or like the gunfighting is a big thing. So part of what I wanted to do is, as a kind of a design test for myself or an experiment, is can I make something that doesn't have combat in it? Um, and a lot of people have reacted in the way you suggested, in that, well, like, so it's a serial killer, or it's a game where you hunt serial killers, but there's no combat. So what happens when you don't get to like shoot the killer in the head at the end of it? Or so you have to have a different approach. I'm not saying that like you absolutely can't use violence as a tool in the game,
Sure.
but there's no mechanized rules for it. So you kind of like take the structure of the game as it is, and it could be that you confront the killer at the end, and you kick him off a roof, or he falls off in kind of in the struggle, or um, you try to disarm him, and you end up dying because of it. So I wanted to take the focus away from combat and put it more on investigation and like piecing together like the trail and the story of the murders, and like tracking down, like trying to figure out, if not why they're doing it, but like who's done it. So with shifting focus more for investigation.
It's funny, like I've been staying silent because like this isn't my world, so like I'm letting
Hell
Monocle
yeah, it's
do
my
all,
world,
obviously.
baby.
No, I know this is Monocle's world, so I let him do the heavy lifting. But like it's hearing all of it is like really interesting because I am very much the action forward gamer. Like all the video games I play are FPS and stuff of that nature, fast paced. But there was one game called Hunter Shadows, and I think we even played it Monocle a while ago, and
Yeah.
it took the basic concept of when your character's dead, you're dead, and the idea of the permanence of death. And that was something that, as like I heard about more like RPG games and stuff like that, tabletops, the idea of like, oh, I have to build a character and then they die and I have to build another one. That sounds like frustrating, but through playing Hunter, I was like, oh, I get it now, because my gameplay changed tremendously. I was not Call of Dutying, fucking slide canceling like an asshole, running around like an idiot. Every bullet mattered. Every, like, I want to keep this guy alive as long as possible. He's leveling up. So it's just fun to hear all the thoughts going into like why those mechanics actually work too, versus just finding it out on my own.
Yeah, and you don't sell yourself short, right? You have played I'm blanking on the name, the Lovecraft RPG. We did a season of a campaign of that together, where I
Oh,
died
Call of
horribly
Cthulhu.
and you lived. Call of Cthulhu. Thank you,
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah, of
So
course I have, because
you have some experience in that realm.
well, I was the Chaos Demon. I literally made every
That's
wrong choice because that's fun for me.
you did.
I was like, I had mania and I was running around like you guys couldn't control me. I was just doing everything wrong because I was like possessed by Cthulhu, and I still lived.
Yeah, I should have put you down myself. I think things would have ended better for both of my characters if I'd had. Well, I want to use this as a jumping off point to talk about the film because Colin, you said a couple of things about subverting expectations, the investigatory piece, which I think is kind of essential and core to what today's movie is going to do. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Black Mountainside. Welcome back. So today, Colin has picked for us Black Mountainside, which is an independent Canadian film from 2014. It's available to stream. I was able to stream it on Amazon. I think it's available on a few other services as well. So it's there for the finding if you'd like to look for it. If you haven't seen it, and you probably haven't because a lot of people didn't, let's give you a quick plot synopsis to start off. Nobody becomes a paleoanthropologist to get rich. But then again, nobody becomes a paleoanthropologist thinking they'll find proof of an ancient civilization in a part of the world it doesn't belong. That's the case for the research team of Black Mountainside, who unearth evidence of an ancient structure that just might make them famous. But soon after the building is unearthed, strange things begin to happen around the campsite. What starts with the disappearance of a few workers soon evolves into a wave of hallucinations and violence, and before long, the outpost realizes they've dug up more than just tools. The first feature from Canadian filmmaker Nick Szostakiwskyj, Black Mountainside is the kind of slow burn cosmic horror that would make fans of John Carpenter proud. Colin, you gave us 4 films when we were talking about having you guest, all of which met our criteria. I fucking love that. Can't give you enough praise for that. And this is the one that we selected. But what made this a film that you added to the list?
I think because I saw this for the first time a couple of years ago, and it was recommended. I keep a list of kind of weird, obscure horror movies, and kind of watch those while I can. So this was on that list. Just I thought the premise sounded cool. I always love watching Canadian horror films, and I love The Thing, which is an obvious kind of touch point and reference for this. But I think it's also interesting in itself in that it's yeah, like you say, it's a slow burn. It it's not what you expect it to be. Um, and yeah, I think it's not perfect, but I think it was a really interesting and enjoyable watch.
Donato, this is a Fantasia film, I believe. Looking at the notes, it premiered a few years ago there in 2014, 2013. Is this one that you had caught before, or was this a first time watch for you?
No, it was a 2014 Fantasia film. So that was about a year or two before I started attending. But
Mm.
no, I mean, I looked at who did review it, and listen, Rob Hunter, Patrick Cooper, like all the right names are there from Bloody and Film School Rejects. So, I was already kind of like, okay, cool. We've got the right people talking about it, saying the right things. And this is a first time watch for me. This was a nice little indie to discover. I'm still like, wading my way through as much as I can, and there's just so much out there still. So the love letter aspect of it, though, is what got me, because there was a movie that came out recently, the Addams Family made, called Hellhole, and it kind of like feels in tandem with it, where it is just a blatant homage to The Thing. Like, we're gonna do Thing on a budget and do it our own way. But I do like how Black Mountainside found a way to do The Thing and give us all those, let's say, gory moments, but weave in a little bit more, weave in the supernatural, and weave in that demigod, whatever you want to call it, whether it's the parasite driving someone crazy or a giant deer god just standing there. I love that visual. Like, it's so very good.
Yeah. And Colin, I was thinking about when you were talking about your investigatory elements of your game, right?
Mhm.
The idea of the figuring out is an important part of what you're offering as a game designer. And I think, I just rewatched The Thing recently. It is still a great movie. One of the things that stood out to me a little bit on this rewatch is you don't really get a sense of what anybody does or what their
Yeah.
accomplishments are, sort of like what they're trying to do, other than just like we're in Antarctica, we're looking at the ice. I'm sure there are super fans out here that could actually, well, on page 13 of the script, it says blah, blah, blah. That's not me. I was just like, oh, it's just a hodgepodge of people, but I don't get a sense of what they're driving towards. That is something the Black Mountain Side gets shockingly right. It is a very intelligent script. It is a very scientific script, and it is specifically placing these characters for a reason, doing the research that they're doing. So, can you talk a little bit about that intelligence and about kind of like giving your characters the what they do in the film, giving their characters more motivation than just, oh, we're on an outpost and we're bored, so we're drinking.
Yeah, I think having intelligent characters behaving in ways you would expect them to begin with uh, helps offset the kind of horror and chaos as things devolve. Like these are all kind of educated men. As an aside, it's really interesting that there are no women at all in the film, like no women characters. Even the Thing had like a voiceover from from a woman, or at least a woman's voice. But having these men be intelligent there for a specific reason, they know what they're doing. They're all pretty professional, and have that just kind of go to hell um, is a nice juxtaposition. And even through everything, they're still trying to figure out what's happening, or like still trying to like they can't help themselves by like discussing, oh, maybe it's this, like maybe it's this kind of culture, or maybe these people died out because of X and that sort of thing. So even when things are going to hell, they're still focusing on the science and doing the research, if it's only just kind of talking about it amongst themselves.
I'm gonna challenge you as a Canadian.
Hmm.
In interviews about the film, Szostakiwskyj says that you are taught growing up a lot about the Paleolithic early man's travels across the land bridge and the pathways that they took through Canada. I had to stop the movie in the first 20 minutes and Google like Clovis structures and a couple of other things a couple of times just to be like, they're not doubling back. They're not telling me what the actual research they're doing there, which I love, but I kind of want to get a sense of that. Is that true? Is part of Canadian education? Is a lot of the stuff they talked about like things that you learn about like pathways from Alaska through Canada into other parts of North America? Is that stuff that our American school systems are just like not bothering with? Because he kind of in his interviews he sort of takes it or treats it a little bit for granted that this is a field of study that folks would have kind of like a rough understanding of watching the movie.
I think on the one hand, these are kind of specialized um, individuals. So I don't know if the general public would kind of understand the history of like migration in the Paleolithic or kind of 20,000 years ago. Um, but on the other hand, we do kind of learn about like a big thing when I was a kid, learning about the history of Canada and the history of North America, is the kind of immigration and migration and um, the exploration that came from England, from the English and the French, sort of like 1600s up to the 1800s, up to the founding of Canada. And I know these days there's a lot more focus on the concept of Turtle Island, which is what Indigenous people refer to North America as. That's their name, like recognizing where cultures existed before, and that's become a really important thing in Canada now. I'm always struck when I go back to visit, because I've been over here in the UK for 17, 18 years now. I'm always struck when I go back how there's a lot more discussion around treaty land, and this is like when there's uh, talk around when there's like dedications, or when there's like municipal or city dedications, or like new buildings open, there's always an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement of whose
Mhm.
land this has traditionally been. So I have in my bios that I'm from Treaty 6 land, which is Alberta in Canada. So there's that kind of discussion and that awareness now of North America wasn't discovered. Like, people have been there for
Yeah.
50,000 years plus. So having that kind of in the discussion nowadays, I think that calls back to that a little bit more in that like they're essentially discussing finding Mayan ruins or like South American ruins in which is essentially the part of the world where 4,000 miles away from where they should be. So it's interesting from that perspective. But yeah, I think there is that kind of that knowledge or that awareness of where people come from and like migration, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting, like Canadian science fiction versus American science fiction. I feel like a lot of stuff stateside, and what I grew up with. When I heard science fiction, I immediately think cosmic, interstellar, space. Like, it has to be spaceships and things of that nature. But watching a lot of Canadian horror and watching a lot of go from Cube to Pontypool. There's a movie called Fugue. Like, it's contained and smaller, and the way that it like explores science fiction, I think, is more existential and grounded in what you're like talking about. Like, it's a lot of the stuff of where did we come from, where are we going. Like, I think it's just way more introspective and way more minimal, but yet broader somehow. Like, the thinking is much grander than science fiction is just aliens shooting each other. Like, no, like,
Yeah.
this brand of science fiction is talking about intelligent characters, talking about just looking at Black Mountain Side specifically, and it's a piece of technology just in the snow. Like, that's a prop that is
Yeah.
such an easy prop to make. It is just part of a box that's like, don't worry, there's a lot more under the snow. We don't need to go there though. And what you draw just from that alone is so very interesting of a conversation between parasitic organisms. Is there some kind of godlike thing, like I mentioned before? And it brings on this like such larger conversation that you're able to have. Like, it's just a very interesting small scale big idea concept I see a lot more in Canadian science fiction than I do elsewhere, let's say, with our science fiction.
The cephalopod thing too was a trip in this, because I feel like you hear that sometimes a bit, like, oh, like squids and octopuses are
Yeah.
so unlike anything that they're alien to this planet, and that's a really big plot point in the film, is that as the characters become sick, they're developing spores, cephalopod spores, basically is it. And I mean, part of it's just the Cronenberg body horror of Canada, right?
Yeah.
That's in y'all's
Exactly.
DNA
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
But it is fun to see them meld that kind of existential horror with the body horror element to get to something that's more fun than just like, oh, that's telepathic monsters. It's like, no,
Yeah.
there's alien physiology at play here. And all of that gets you to the point where then it's exciting to watch them go after each other with axes, because that's that's going to happen eventually, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think like watching this, because I rewatched it last night to prepare for this, and it's really funny because I don't know if you've both watched the new Vince Gilligan's new series Pluribus.
No, I'm starting that
Um,
tonight.
I won't say too much, just because like there's like kind of the main conceit hasn't been, at least in the trailers that I've seen, hasn't been kind of explicitly said in the trailers,
Yeah.
but I think there's some kind of symmetry between this and between Black Mountain Side and Pluribus. It's interesting, but I won't say much just to kind of avoid spoiling anything for you.
Well, and I like that you brought up the Vince Gilligan, because one of the bits of feedback that I've seen a lot of people talk about with his new show, it's like, oh, great, we got X-Files Vince Gilligan back. Like, they're letting
Yeah.
him do, no knock on Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but they're like, his roots are in sci-fi and horror in the X-Files series, and we're getting that flavor of Gilligan back. And that was something that as I was watching Black Mountain Side, there's obviously the Thing comparisons are overt in there.
hmm
Szostakiwskyj says in interviews that he would give more credit to the Andromeda Strain as an influence for him than the
Right, I can see that.
deals with like existential extraterrestrial horror type thing. But there was, I found myself coming back again and again to everybody's favorite episode, or one of their favorite episodes of X-Files, which is Ice, right? Which is the episode where group of them go to this base up in Alaska, and there are these parasites that get into them, and blah blah blah. And it is a thing riff, but it is a more like molecular and science based thing riff again, which I think Black Mountain Side is doing particularly well here. So I want to use that as a jumping off point to talk a little bit about the horror elements too, because we're talking about how smart this is and how heady this is and how
Mhm.
slow burn this is. And there's going to be a lot of people to hear that and say, cool. There's going to be a few people to hear that and go, yeah, but does fucking anything happen? Colin, can you talk a little bit about when things actually do start to get gnarly, especially in that last 30 minutes or so?
Yeah, I think there's some really like striking reveals when we see, so some things we don't see, like we don't see what happens to the cat, we just kind of see the aftermath, and we don't see what happens to McNaughton, but we see the aftermath. So we see everyone else's reaction before we see what's actually happened to him, and he's shot himself, and that's a horrific reveal. That, and when a similar kind of reveal is when Francis cuts his own hand off. Like we don't know what's going on, and then just kind of pans over, and we see that he's cut his hand off, and he's just like frantic and out of his own head. And just that, like those moments are really shocking because it's been such a slow burn up to that point. And then obviously like everything shit goes to hell when, like, on the last day essentially, just
Mm-hmm.
everyone, everyone starts gunning for each other. So yeah, I think the slow burn pays off. Like those kind of reveals are really effective because I think part of the reason is because it's in daytime. Both when we see McNaughton and we see Francis, it's daytime, so it's not like it's not dark out, and horror is always scarier in the daytime, or
Correct.
a lot of ways. So yeah, it's an interesting payoff to the slow build, and I think it helps set up the like the finale.
And it keeps us in the room. I think the idea of not showing us the things happening and giving us certainty
Hmm.
is to have us be in the room with these characters and be just as confused and be just as suspicious, because if the film followed a narrative format, we would see everything in real time and it would hop between, and we would know, like, okay, well, we know who to believe, we know who's lying, and sure, there's tension in those moments, but there's a hell of a lot more tension when, like you just said, we cut to a dead cat and one character's blaming somebody else, but we don't, well, who do we
Yeah.
believe in this? Who's telling the truth? And that's tenfold when we walk in and somebody's hands cut off, and you're like, okay, well, what happened here? Like, there's a lot that people might complain about in that kind of suspense, and having to just kind of roll with punches and stumble our way through a movie, for lack of a better phrasing. But if you're able to be in that kind of mindset and like lose yourself to the mystery, it only benefits. It's the idea of, well, I don't know what's going on, so I can't certainly believe anyone here, and I'm just as, choose your own adventure at the end of the day.
Donato, I want to follow up on that really quickly too, because I think one of the things this movie does that I really like is it gives you a scene to sort of pop that bubble. Like there are a lot of films will do, they'll do scenes where a character dies or something will happen and it's sudden or quick or it's kind of an aftermath. This movie has a tracking shot. It has an extended sequence where you recognize that this is effectively at that point game over for this group of people. They're not going to make it. Not all of them are going to make it. Probably none of them are going to make it. So Donato, before I ask Colin, I'd love to get your thoughts on how that tracking scene played with you, because I thought that was a really neat thing that kind of came out of left field.
Yeah, I mean, like, left field is kind of like, at that point I think you're kind of expecting the unexpected, maybe, in
Mm,
in a way. So it's like, I won't say it's completely left field. Like, we need something to ramp up. We need something to kind of take over and be that climactic finale, let's say, or whatever you want to call it. I think that tremendously works here, because when you have the slow burn for so long, and Monagle or anyone listening to this podcast, that, like, I'm a little more harsh on slow burns. I need a little bit more in my pacing, as I just said before about video games. Like, that's me. It's just my kind of style. But in the payoff versus build up conversation, when you have something like the tracking shot that we have here, And I mean, we can spoil this, right, dude? Like
Yeah.
we're a if you want to watch fresh, go do that. Pause. Or you
You
shouldn't be listening
control
to this
your own
anyway.
destiny, listener. We have no control over your pause button. Only you can pause this podcast.
Yeah. So anyway, the tracking shot. I mean, we are talking about when Giles has the gun and just goes room to room and kills all the survivors except one. Let's say, right? Like that is it's horrifying in a way. Like it's such an abrupt end to something that was so insightful to that point. It is a intellectual film for so long until it is just about a man with a gun killing everyone. And I think again, using abruptness, I think that's what really is effective about it. And left field, yeah, you're right, actually it is entirely left field. Like that's, we're going along this set of logic and we're going along this detective path, this discovery, and then all it
And
comes
we're
down
doing,
to
sorry
is
to interrupt, but we're doing very static camera shots too. Like the camera really
Right.
doesn't move a ton in this movie until it moves constantly, which is another cool little thing that Szostakiwskyj does, I think. Keep going, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, and it just devolves into chaos. It is exactly the kind of payoff that, there's other films that try the same thing and they kind of just whisper out, and they don't ever hit that fever pitch. They don't hit the right height. And I think having this be the almost near final conflict, the near final payoff and reward, yeah, it's effective. It's effective because it's a shot to the head, like literally over and over again. We're not going to waste time anymore. Like, here is the outcome. You're right. Everyone's going to die, and we're going to do it really fucking quick. And it's like that jarring sense of, oh, okay, we're going to now speed to the ending. Yeah, works.
Same for you, Colin. Fan of that scene?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. Just because because I think I struggled even with the rewatch of like placing names with faces, saying like
Oh
who
yeah.
like
No
like
idea who any of the
who's
names were.
who.
I'm so sorry to that
Yeah,
cast. This is my I don't know that man. I'm so sorry to this man
yeah,
moment.
yeah. So half of the time I confused McNaughton with Francis, and I really had to get it straight in my own head. So and I think that that kind of helps that scene, the tracking shot, because you're like, oh, who's that? Who just got shot? Like, what's going on? Like, it adds to the chaos. Like, the cook gets shot, and I don't think he had any lines in the film. So you're like, oh, was that okay? I guess he got shot too, and so just wiping everyone out. Yeah, it's, I think, very effective. And I think it does come out of nowhere, but it kind of like, you can see Giles like starting to go off the rails a little bit,
Yeah.
especially carrying the rifle around. It's so there's a bit of like laying the breadcrumbs, just like the kind of the final shocking event is like the breadcrumbs are laid right at the beginning or near the beginning
Yeah.
of like Chekhov's bear trap.
Yes, sir. I did. The moment you mentioned bear traps in a movie, you know that they're going to come into
Yeah,
play in a horror film. They'll be
yeah.
back. Don't you worry about it. Well, I want to ask you. We're gonna wrap with our final question about the film, but I want to ask you one more question before we get there, which is: you are a tabletop designer. You don't need to include music in what you do, and yet you have. You have released. You partnered
Mhm.
with a musician and released a synth score for Midnight of the Century. It's an 8-track, described as occult ambient synth companion EP for 90s serial killer investigation. I bring this up because I really enjoyed watching Black Mountain Side. I had one fucking problem with this movie, which is it didn't have a score. And I understand why, from a creative mindset, that you might want to do that. No movie in the history of mankind has ever needed some kind of ambience, to me, more than Black Mountain Side. That just would have been the thing that put it over the top. So I want to ask you, as somebody who has created something and made sure there was music, even though there was no diegetic or
Mhm.
even like medium reason for you to have music with it, you made sure Midnight of the Century had music. How do you feel about the decision, Shostakovsky, to not have music in this film?
Well, one of the like, because I was taking notes during my rewatch last night, and one of the first things I wrote down was, movie starts with no score, and then it continues that way throughout the whole thing. Um, I think on the one hand, like one of the most memorable things about the thing is the score and John Carpenter's amazing music. So maybe it was to avoid any kind of comparison with that, or like an element of production couldn't afford it. That's a kind of a cop out answer. I do think it would have benefited from a score, or at least like some kind of motifs, like just to tie things together. I do like what it's going for. Like I like the stark outcome of it, and because like having grown up in Alaska, you know how quiet it is in the winter, like in
Yes.
the wilderness. So I could see that element of it as well. Like it's just silence. Like that's the thing about being in the middle of nowhere in the winter, especially at night. It's just silence. It's too cold for animals to be out. Like you just can't hear anything, and sound travels really far. So I'll be kind of generous and say it's thematic in that it represents isolation and kind of the silence of the situation. But I do think, yeah, I think it could be enhanced by a killer score.
And I'm kind of happy it didn't try what it maybe couldn't do, because if it was a budgetary thing, like you're suggesting, if it was,
Mm.
hey, this is just one thing we don't have the money for, so let's not do it. I appreciate that, because I see a lot of indie horror that, it's the same thing of you notice a good score because it adds something to the film. And most of the time you don't notice the score because it's just there. And then there's another section, let's say, where sometimes you do notice the score because it's fucking awful and it just detracts from the movie. And with so much of this being a conversational, more science driven, research data driven film, we didn't need a Casio keyboard under there. I'm glad they didn't try anything that like minimal or stuff like that. So
Sure.
I go along with the thematic as well. I think it is thematic in the sense that I'm trying to think of other movies that take place in the stark wilderness that we've done here, like The Interior and stuff of that nature. And if they had a score, because could it have helped maybe some of the more supernatural scenes where you do have the imagery of this deer, demon, god, whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it, talking? And could it have benefited from a little bit of eeriness in the background? Of course, I think that would have built it up, but there is something unsettling about it just existing in reality. And like having no score makes it feel more genuine and authentic and real. And this man having a conversation with a giant standing deer, human sized, is like, okay, now this is like a fever dream versus anything else. So I think that's where it escalated for me and where it actually benefited from not having a score. But I also would have loved one too, because I'm someone who collects scores. So that is
Yeah.
that is something on my mind.
Yeah.
I
I
think
get it. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think there's definitely space for there to be a bit more of a dynamic like soundscape. Because you mentioned the deer god, and that was one of my notes, is that I think they hit that a little too much. They kind of kept coming back a little too much, and I think it would have been improved by a lighter touch. Part of it, like the whole vibe, especially like the sequences where the deer god is talking, it reminded me a lot of Session 9, and that kind of
Mm,
voiceover and the like unearthly or potentially supernatural voice, and that kind of had a much more interesting and dynamic soundscape. And I think I like what they did with the deer god. I think it's a really cool. The concept is really cool, but I think they could have tweaked it a little bit more to make it a bit more effective and a bit less present.
yeah, I'll give a shout out to actor Nathaniel Gordon, who does the voiceover for the Deer God, and I mean, if you're trying to get Ralph Ineson for something and he's unavailable, I strongly recommend you go figure out what Nathaniel Gordon is doing, because I bet he's cheaper and he's just as good. So go do that if you're listening to me. Also, Szostakiwskyj, if you're listening, email me at monagle@certifiedforgotten.com and tell me about your decision not to have a score. I'd love to talk about that a little bit. I need to know. Please tell me. I need to know. All right. That brings us to our last question. We talk about on the podcast how these films are forgotten, fairly or unfairly, and how they're going to regain the audience they deserve in time. So, Colin, my last question for you is, how do you think a film like Black Mountain Side eventually finds an audience that's going to be excited by the atmosphere, by the intelligence, by the existential or cosmic horror? What is this movie's pathway to rediscovery among even non Canadian viewers, I'll say?
I think, well, we talked a bit about accompanied films, like films with accompanied soundtracks, like live orchestral scores. I think this would potentially be a candidate for something like that, to kind of write an original score to be performed live with a screening of it. There was in the local to me recently, there was a live orchestral performance of a BBC film from the '60s called "Whistle and I'll Come to You," which is based on an M.R. James short story. And I didn't get a chance to go to the actual live orchestral score, but I watched the film afterwards, and there was no score at all. It was totally like no music, just like Black Mountain Side. So it's a like perfect candidate if someone wanted to write an original score for Black Mountain Side, and perform that with accompanied with the film. I think that would be amazing, because it's like calling out for it.
I'm going to give a quick shout out again. There's a band in New York called Morricone Youth that does just that. They release soundtracks to movies and play them live, and we actually used them as our opening music for I think the first year and a half of the podcast before we had an original composition. So I am very into the idea of letting a band take their interpretation or their whack at a soundtrack like this. I think that's a great match and a great way of building an in-person audience. Donato, as for you, how do you think Black Mountainside finds its fans?
This definitely gets the usual talking point I have, but we put it on Shudder, put it on one of these horror niche services because, again, I'll bring up Hellhole and watching Black Mountainside, and I'm thinking, the way that everyone has taken to the Addams Family and their brand of independent filmmaking, The Deeper You Dig, Hellhole, Hellbender, like all that stuff. There's more than the Addams Family out there, though, doing independent horror, and I feel like the conversation can be so straightforward, and we only like bring up the same names over and over again. Where this is not a slight against the Addams Family, but I think Black Mountainside is a better thing homage than Hellhole is in a lot of ways. And I know Hellhole isn't exactly doing it, but still, like, the comparisons are there in certain ways, and I like the comparison to say, oh, cool, like, if you're into The Thing, if you're into Hellhole, if you're into blah blah blah, shining a light on a movie like Black Mountainside in the right rooms and audience is very important. So this is on, like you said, it's on Tubi, it's on Amazon Prime, it's on all the places you can find it. But until the right person values it and starts talking about it, it's still going to be one that is easily looked over. So this is the niche kind of. It needs the internal horror bump, and it needs the right people to say something about it. And once they do, and it again, if it's a Shudder or something like that, that's an easy recommend. So it needs that little bit of oomph.
And what I'll say for myself is that I liked there's stuff about this movie that I don't love. I don't love the lack of a score. I beat that point all the way into the ground. But there is enough here that excited me about Szostakiwskyj as a filmmaker that I'm actually tonight going to watch his second film, which is also available on Tubi and Amazon Prime and all the places that you'd go, because there is there's the DNA of a really, really big talent here. And I'm kind of excited to see how that carries over his next couple of features. So that to me is the praise that I can get is sometimes we talk about films on this podcast. Maybe this one isn't the one that catches on, but maybe one of the later works that they did, which is playing similarly with themes or ideas or filmmaking concepts, is something that is a bit more broadly approachable. And then people discover their first work or their second work, and it goes well from there. So we'll see. I'm going to do a deep dive into all things Szostakiwskyj, and I say his name as much as I can because I put a lot of time and effort into getting it as right as possible. So that's my pledge to you. You email me to tell me about the soundtrack decision and I pronounce your name correctly. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. That is it for this episode of Certified Forgotten. Colin, for fans of horror who want to see what you're watching, I know you're on Letterboxd, or other things that they've got going on, what are some places they follow you? How do they follow you online? How do they follow you on Letterboxd? What's all the good stuff?
So I think I gotta double check. I think my Letterboxd is Bioden Spirit RPG. Oh yeah, so it's just C. Le Sueur. That's my Letterboxd handle. It's not as interesting as Bioden Spirit RPG, and it's a lot harder to spell.
Yep.
So it's CLESUEUR. That's where you can find me on Letterboxd. And you can find me everywhere else, basically at BiotenSpiritRPG. So BiotenSpiritRPG.com and on all the major social medias except for Twitter. Fuck Elon Musk. But on Blue Sky, you can find me there. And Midnight of the Century, there's a website for it as well, which I'll link to on my main website, which is kind of a retro 90s style website.
Very cool. And you have two conventions you're going to this year, if you're a listener and you happen to be in your area, or this month. I'm sorry, two conventions in November that you're headed to, correct?
That's right, yeah. So Thought Bubble is a comic arts festival in Harrogate, and that happens this weekend. So what's that? The 15th and 16th.
So if you're listening to this on Friday or Saturday, you've got 36 hours to get out there, make that happen.
And then Dragon Meet is in London at the end of the month on the 29th. That's a one-day event, but it's always a lot of fun. And I'm doing a pre-order for Midnight of the Century, and so you can get some cool swag for the game, and get a pre-order for it as well.
I love it. Donato, I know you're not tabling in any conventions upcoming, but how do folks stay connected with you online?
You can, as always, follow me at DonatoBomb, DonatoBomb, and that is Blue Sky, Letterboxd, and Instagram mostly. And yeah, we're in award season in the thick of it. So if you're following my socials, you will see all of my reactions to the movies I have missed over the years, and holy shit, it's a lot of them. But we still got some reviews upcoming, so keep on that. Keep on watching for Keeper, maybe. Yeah, we got some stuff.
It was very fun to see you drop a reaction to One Battle After Another yesterday. I was like, really? You hadn't gotten to that one? All right, I respect it.
Oh, dude, I am way behind. Like, Hamnet just hit my screening app. I just got the email notification. I'm like, hell yeah.
If it's not horror, you haven't watched it yet, but you'll make up for it in the end. You got to vote. As for myself, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Monocle at bsky.social. You can follow me, or whatever it is. You can follow me on Instagram if you want. I'm locked down there, but maybe if you're nice, I'll accept you. And most importantly, you can follow Certified Forgotten on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Facebook, though we don't update there very often. You can also go to certifiedforgotten.com/newsletter and sign up for our newsletter. You will get every Monday or Tuesday a summary of our previous week's things that we publish, the podcast episodes, things of that nature. And then you'll get delivered to your inbox every new episode of this podcast on Fridays. We make it easy. Send you a link, you click there, you get everything you need. Colin, thank you so much for breaking new territory as our first game designer to be on the podcast. Donato doesn't know what he signed up for because I find tabletop to be amazing and I want to invite more tabletop people on. So you are, I think, the first of many.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me. There's a lot of film-influenced tabletop designers and games out there, like Liminal Horror, I think would fit perfectly. So yeah, it's a great time to be a horror fan and a tabletop fan.
There you go. Donato, eat your words. We got this. We're going to be everything to everyone. But please, sir, take us home.
Oh.